Um, Please don't feel shy about adding anything you need to the chat so that I can follow along and make sure that I'm addressing whatever it is that you want. I want to make it as personalized as possible. So if there's something specific you're here to learn, let me know and I will make sure to get it to you. This presentation is about leadership in a time of crisis. And I'm going to be doing some very workshopy type stuff about how to draw out the leader in you, looking at examples of good leadership and poor leadership in a COVID time. I don't know if you are like this, but this is kind of how things are feeling for me right now. Everything feels a little bit in crisis, this whole collective trauma around COVID, that there's a lot of fear and anxiety and uncertainty in the world. And then us as educators are feeling burnt out, disconnected, just multitasking all over the place and putting out fires, not able to really focus on our true mission and helping keep our team moving forward. So the goal today is really to look at some of the research behind what makes a successful leader in a time of crisis, and also how can we as leaders here in charter schools make a difference and really bring some of these leadership principles that have been discovered within the business schools and research community around leadership. How can we bring that back to our sites? So a little bit about me. My name is Irene Salter. I am the admin superintendent at Chrysalis Charter School. I was in that role for the last 7 years. Before that, I founded the science education department at Chico State. And that was a whole group of faculty who were really helping to reform the way that science was taught to future teachers, especially the K through 8 population. They were not successful inside of like Bio 101 for the med students. So we wanted to create something completely different for them. And before that, I was a middle school science and math teacher. And before that, I was a neuroscientist and I studied the brain systems underlying learning and motivation. So my passion and heart is both in really serving people and making a difference in the world, as well as in this kind of research base of understanding things based on what's the newest and the latest coming out of academia, understanding learning, motivation, and more recently, leadership. So I'm reading your your responses. So I love this idea about being able to present to your leadership team how to improve working from home. All right, let's work on that, okay? What I'm going to do is this presentation is going to be in a couple parts. There's going to be a first part where I introduce you to a book that really changed how I think about leadership right at the beginning of the COVID crisis. Then we're going to also then talk about looking at examples of great leadership and poor leadership, and how do we then kind of change the dynamic, and especially how do we communicate with our staff and our families in a way that feels supportive and meaningful. And throughout, it's going to be very workshopy in that you'll need some pen and paper, because my challenge to you is I would love for you to listen for the insights that you might gain, not necessarily for agreement with everything that is being said. There's a couple of things I just wanted to throw out there as caveats that right now there is some controversy over J.K. Rowling about not being insensitive about some of the things that she is saying about people that identify as transgendered. I wanted to make sure that everybody here feels welcome. I use she and he pronouns. It's not about that. It's also not about politics. There is going to be some videos of current leaders dealing with the COVID crisis, and I'm not trying to add to the red-blue divide. What I would like to do is just show you that this is the research and this is what it says about how to lead in a time where things are so disrupted, and then giving you some examples of what it looks like in a poor way. And I'll be using scenes from Harry Potter's movies in order to illustrate the poor leadership. And then I'll be showing you examples from real world leaders dealing with COVID as exemplars of good leadership. And again, it's not about the politics behind it. It's about what kinds of things do these current leaders do that is a productive use of their leadership position in a way to kind of bring their teams forward and bring their countries forward or bring their states forward. All right. So first thing, I wanted to share with you the book that was kind of really instrumental for me. In March of 2020, I came across this book. It was probably right at the end of March when I ran into it, and I read it voraciously. It's by Nancy Cohen. She is a historian at the Harvard School of Business, and she studies leadership from exemplars from the past. She studies Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Rachel Carson, a whole bunch of different people. And she looks at what did they do in their times of crisis? How did they make a difference and how did they make a change? And she had a really beautiful interview very recently. And I'm just going to show you a quick little clip. While you listen, just kind of take a look at what she thinks about leadership in a crisis period.
I've been studying leaders in crisis now for 20 years, from the past and the present. My book is about past leaders, but I spend a lot of time, because I'm at the Harvard Business School, with leaders today. And there's a very interesting and very, very interesting phenomenon. Sounds trivial. Very interesting set of things that happen in widespread turbulence, intensifying turbulence. And you see it over and over. And the person I think who captured it best is Abraham Lincoln, talking in December of 1862 at one of the many kind of low points of the Union, and particularly the Union Army's fortunes, on which the future of the country hinged in Civil War. And he said, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. And, he's talking about a multi-chapter crisis, not unlike the COVID crisis. And he's talking about the need to, raise the level of our collective game. Leaders raise their game, generals raise their game, ordinary Americans raise their game, politicians raise their game. And that's what happens, I have seen over and over again in crises. As you know, Brian, because we've talked about this before, I stand firmly on a mountain of evidence and now, half a lifetime of research that says that the courageous leaders, effective leaders, real leaders are made, they're not born. And there's something about the urgency and the high stakes, particularly of a longer crisis like this one, in which leaders find themselves being made at a more intense, more sustained, and more powerful and demonstrable, right, evident way. And we see that, over and over again, including in people who aren't great leaders before the crisis. They kind of come out of the mist and discover, hey, this is my moment, and they rise. They rise to the challenge. So leadership as our kind of most courageous leadership. I'm not talking about, inconsistent or, fearful leadership or, manipulative leadership. I'm talking about courageous leadership. We see lots of it all around the world. Courageous leaders get better, and they're mostly or most powerfully made in crisis.
Awesome. So, what did you think, Jose? I'm curious what your thought is about that statement that courageous leaders get better and are most powerfully made in crisis. I wish I could have you talk. I'd love to have a conversation. Hey, if I put my cell phone number in there, would you want to just give me a call so that we can talk our way through this and have a conversation that way? The text chat's just kind of so limiting. Oh, hi, Rebecca. Welcome. Rebecca, just to quickly catch you up, we were talking about leadership in a time of crisis, and I introduced our other participants to Nancy Cohen, who's a historian at the Harvard School of Business. And her ideal is that courageous leaders get better and will rise to an occasion when there's a time of crisis, when there's a time of extreme disruption. And I see COVID times as like, oops, wrong one. I see COVID times as that time of disruption. And so what we're talking about and thinking about is whether you agree or disagree with that idea about whether courageous leaders can get better and can be more powerfully made in that time of crisis. Because this session is so small, I'm going to pop my cell phone number in here. And I would invite you, if you wanted to kind of get on the phone with me. That way we can have a conversation and it can be much more interactive than having to do everything through this kind of chat channel. So please feel free if you wish to, no need to if you don't want to, but if you want to kind of get onto a voice line, we can kind of proceed with the presentation that way, and perhaps I can make it even more interactive than it was already. I like what you said about, hardship is when we can become better people. I certainly found that myself when I was trying to navigate my school, that there were things that I certainly found out about myself as a leader in this time that were very different skills than I ever had to apply when it was just kind of school as normal. Like I felt like I was a pretty good leader in, I guess, peacetime times. But then suddenly, when there was this, almost like wartime crisis, suddenly that ability to kind of draw upon some of those skills and some of those skills that were hidden under the surface really kind of came to the surface and came to the forefront. And I'll talk a little bit about what those are. Some of those are related to how do you respond to fear and uncertainty? And the other part is really how do you respond to this idea of power versus vulnerability? And those two, I think, were the big lessons for myself through this kind of work. And I'd love to kind of move that forward a little bit. So let's take a look at what is the next little section. So the next section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example of that response to fear and uncertainty. And I would love for you to create this little T-chart. So we're going to be looking at Cornelius Fudge. He's the Minister of Magic in the Harry Potter series, and we're going to pick up with him during one of these times where it is clear that the bad guy of the movies, of the Harry Potter series, Voldemort, is rising. He is back, but the Minister of Magic is denying that. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty. We're going to look at how he reacts, and we're going to compare that with Angela Merkel. She is the Chancellor of Germany, and we're also going to look at De Wine. He is the Republican governor of Ohio. And we're going to look at how those two versus Cornelius Fudge react to that crisis moment in that time of fear and uncertainty, and kind of compare and contrast and take a look at what happens in those different leaders. So again, what I want you to do is kind of be looking at how do they respond to fear. So the sections of the movie that I'm going to be taking you through for Harry Potter, for those of you who are kind of Harry Potter newbies. Harry Potter is a boy who just kind of happened to be caught in the middle of this time in a wizarding society where a dark wizard is rising, and he is the one that kind of gets in the middle of everything. And what you're going to see first is a scene where the Minister of Magic is kind of controlling the situation and controlling the messaging in order to discredit the things that Harry has seen. He has seen firsthand that Voldemort, the bad guy, is back. But because there's so much fear, they're trying to discredit him. And they're trying to eliminate that threat and to silence that. So I'm going to show you that portion. We're going to see a dinner scene where Harry is there with a bunch of his friends, and then we're going to see a scene at a courtroom where Harry is being accused of doing magic outside of school, which you're not allowed to do. So we're going to head over there now. Oops, come on. There we are. So this is the first mistake we're going to take a look at, is that fear and uncertainty.
very, very peculiar. It seems that your hearing in the ministry used to be before the entire wizardry.
I don't understand. What has the Ministry of Magic got against me?
Show him. We'll find out soon enough.
He's been attacking Dumbledore as well.
Fudge is using all his power, including his influence at the Daily Prophet, to smear anyone who claims the Dark Lord has returned.
Why?
The minister thinks Dumbledore's after his job.
But that's insane. No one in their right mind could believe that Dumbledore...
Exactly the point. Fudge isn't in his right mind. It's been twisted and warped by fear. Now, fear makes people do terrible things, Harry. The last time Voldemort gained power, he almost destroyed everything we hold most dear. Now he's returned, and I'm afraid the minister will do almost anything to avoid facing that terrifying truth.
All right. And then, as I said, the next scene that I'm going to show you takes you to the courtroom where Harry is being accused of doing magic outside of school. Cornelius Fudge is the one that I want you to focus on. He is going to be the one in a black robe sitting in a very high chair. And look at what his response is to kind of that idea of fear and uncertainty and being challenged.
Of course, there is someone who might be behind the attack. Cornelius, I implore you to see reason. The evidence that the Dark Lord has returned is incontrovertible. He stopped back. In the matter of Harry Potter, the law clearly states that magic may be used before Muggles in life-threatening situations.
Laws can be changed if necessary, Dumbledore.
Clearly, it's become practice to hold a full criminal trial to deal with a simple matter of underage magic.
All right. So you might want to note on your little T-chart what areas you felt like you stood out to you regarding fear and uncertainty with this kind of example of mistakes that were made. And now I'm going to show you two examples of, first, Angela Merkel. She is the chancellor at Germany right now, and she's actually she's actually doing a really good job, or at least that's what the public in Germany is believing. And so we're going to take a look at some of her strategy. This is a kind of summary of her leadership from a German magazine called DW.
Look at her strategy since the corona crisis began. Typically for Merkel, she took her time to speak up in the early days of the pandemic. Many say too long. But when she did, she became the first international leader to be as blunt as to present her public with some unfiltered, scary facts.
Weiter muss man verstehen, wenn das Virus da ist und noch keine Immunität der Bevölkerung gegenüber diesem Virus vorliegt, keine Impfmöglichkeiten existieren, auch noch keine Therapiemöglichkeiten, dass dann ein hoher Prozentsatz, Experten sagen 60-70% der Bevölkerung infiziert werden.
Und das hat die Frau Bundeskanzlerin eben zu Recht gesagt, dass es sich um ein pandemisches Virus handelt, also ein Virus, das 60-70% der Menschen infizieren wird.
I was in the room when Angela Merkel effectively handed the lead over to Germany's top scientists.
Und unsere politischen Maßnahmen richten wir an den Empfehlungen dieser Fachleute aus.
Germans didn't need much convincing after seeing the harrowing scenes in hospitals in northern Italy. As the shutdown kicked in, there was a first for Angela Merkel. For the first time in more than 14 years of being German Chancellor, she spontaneously took to national television to plead with Germans to take their own responsibility in this crisis, with no promise of a happy end.
Diese Situation ist ernst und sie ist offen. Das gehört zu einer offenen Demokratie. Dass wir die politischen Entscheidungen auch transparent machen und erläutern. Dass wir unser Handeln möglichst gut begründen und kommunizieren, damit es nachvollziehbar wird.
Germany managed to flatten the curve without overstretching its healthcare system. Angela Merkel called this a fragile success as many regions started to reopen. But the Chancellor didn't celebrate. Instead, she acted as a kind of matron of her 16 federal state leaders. Some, she felt, were getting ahead of themselves and declaring the worst of the crisis to be over.
Niemand hört es gerne, aber es ist die Wahrheit. Wir leben nicht in der Endphase der Pandemie, sondern immer noch an ihrem Anfang. Wir werden noch lange mit diesem Virus leben müssen.
Germany's empty hospital beds are evidence of Angela Merkel's leadership success. Yet thousands took to the streets across Germany to protest Merkel's corona policy, a loud minority, as the latest polls continue to show more than 80% of Germans backing the restrictions. But when it comes to things she simply hasn't thought through yet, Merkel, very unworld leader-like, simply asks for more time.
Für diese Meinungsbildung brauche ich noch ein paar Stunden, Herr Vogel, aber ich werde Sie dann informieren.
So it appears that Angela Merkel's biggest secret to success in this crisis so far was that she didn't really have any, that she was willing to say what she didn't know. As a result, the German Chancellor, who until just over 2 months ago was already being described as a lame duck leader in her last term, has now emerged with soaring approval ratings, leaving Merkel fans and critics more than ever at a loss to imagine a post-Merkel Germany in autumn 2021.
All right. Well, Meg, Shannon, and Jose, Meg, welcome to the session. I wanted to invite you to kind of take a look at these clips. Right now, we're looking at a clip of a leader who is successfully navigating COVID, using some of the principles of, excellent leadership, and really trying to figure out what it is that they're doing in response to fear and uncertainty. Like, that's the kind of lens that we're looking through. Another clip that I'd like to show you is Mike DeWine. He is the Republican governor of Ohio. And this is actually a clip from I think yesterday, in the way that he was presenting, and I'm not even from Ohio, but I was really impressed by the way that he delivered a message about how do you deal with Thanksgiving celebrations. And that's a struggle that I'm having at my school. We are right now in a hybrid format. That is that we have students on campus 4 days a week, half days. So the idea there is really, how do you communicate to families about what it is that we need them to do at home over the Thanksgiving break in order for us to stay open, in order for us to still be able to have school for their children when they come back. And I'm trying to figure out, how do you do that message in that time of fear and uncertainty and confusion and anxiety? How can you do that well? So here's a little bit from the press conference.
Thanksgiving is coming up. It's certainly one of our favorite holidays, and I know that everyone's going to be celebrating differently than we have in the past. And I thought I'd ask Fran to tell you all how the DeWine family is going to be celebrating Thanksgiving this year. Fran?
Well, I always look forward to Thanksgiving. It really is a fun time. And every year right here in this room, my kids and my grandkids, our kids and grandkids gather together, and my 94-year-old mother, and usually in the evening, my brothers and sisters come and their kids come too, and we have a great time. But this year, it's just going to be different, and it really breaks my heart because we just can't risk it. My mother's 94. We've got 2 brand new, beautiful babies, and we've got our other grandkids go to school every day with lots and lots of kids. So I'm still going to cook. I'm going to roast that turkey. I've started making my homemade rolls. I've got my pie shells started for my pumpkin pies, and we're making apple dumplings and lots of good things. But it's going to be different because instead of everyone coming here, Mike and I are actually going to deliver it, or they're going to pick it up. We're going to take it right to their homes. And we'll do some FaceTime and we'll do some Zoom time too. But we just can't be together. We really, really look forward to next year after we get this vaccine, when we can all be together and we all want to be here when we get this virus under control. So I think, we just can't take chances now if we all want to be here next year. So.
Thanks, Fran. And the turkey is being raised by our son, John, and his wife, Michelle. So we're looking forward to that, as we always do every year.
All right. I'm going to turn that screen sharing off. What I'd invite all of you to do is, in the chat, tell me a little bit about what it was that struck you about excellent leadership versus poor leadership when you're faced with that fear and uncertainty, when you're trying to communicate to others what it is that needs to happen, how it is that we can take a leadership role. I'd love to see what you drew out of those clips. Lori, welcome. I'm so glad to see you here. Right now, what we're doing is we're looking at the differences between excellent leadership in a time of crisis. We're looking at the coronavirus as that crisis moment that we're all facing here at school. And we're looking for some insights from a couple of clips that I showed of excellent leadership and poor leadership. I'll give you another moment to share your thoughts in the chat. Being vocal, even if your voice shakes. Yes. That little bit of vulnerability matters. Even if that message is hard. I remember very clearly having to tell my families that school is closed and it's likely to stay closed for the rest of spring. And that was such a hard message for me to send, because I knew how devastating that was going to be for a lot of the parents that worked. And how are we going to manage that? So what we did was we actually, we delivered that message in as loving, a caring way. I even emphasized how that would impact my family, because I have 2 kids that go to the school and both my husband and I work. But we did make a plan so that those families who were going to be heavily impacted and financially wouldn't be able to sustain, we made a pact with them that if they really needed the school, we would ask our aides if any one of them would be willing to kind of open up a kind of daycare, ability for them to have their kids at school supervised by one of our staff. And it had to be a staff that was willing. And I had actually 2 that were willing to do that. So the 2 of them and I were the only ones on campus. We had a group of 4 kids, but that allowed those families to really continue to work and to continue to be out and do what they needed to do, knowing that their kids were safe. Meg, thank you for that, honesty and the vulnerability. Lori, exactly, modeling that desired behavior. Like, if you want to have your families do what you need them to do to keep your school strong and safe, modeling that in your own family is really, really, really important. I loved what you said, Jose, that poor leadership is denying or undermining a truth that cannot be ignored. So if you pretend that it doesn't exist, or you don't listen to some of the advice that's coming in, you're not as informed. And by denying the truth or denying the facts, you're having a problem of being able to actually make good decisions. Leaders really need to be able to make good decisions based on the full range of facts in front of them and figure out how to synthesize that into something that is going to sustain their community. Great. All right. So I do have another pair of videos to show you that we can take a look at. The first one is of Professor Umbridge, who's the Undersecretary to the Minister of Magic. We're taking a look in this case of power and vulnerability. And I love how both Meg and Lori brought that idea up, because that idea of vulnerability, I think, this is the Brene Brown thing, right? And we'll go back to Brene in a minute, but it's really looking at, when you are a leader, what is the role of that versus what is the role of staying in power and control? And how does those play together? So if you've got a little T-chart, you can kind of keep some notes about what are your insights about poor leadership, as illustrated by Dolores Umbridge. And we're going to take a look at, in contrast, some stuff from Brene Brown, as well as Jacinda Ardern. She is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and looking at how she responded to the crisis. So back to sharing. And so this is Dolores Umbridge. She's that undersecretary, and we're going to take a look at that kind of idea of power and empathy and vulnerability. So this is the first class that she is teaching. She's teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts, and she's going to take a look. We're going to take a look at how she relates to kind of power and whether to empower others or not.
Your previous instruction in this subject has been disturbingly uneven. But you'll be pleased to know, from now on, you will be following a carefully structured, ministry-approved course of defensive magic. Yes.
There's nothing in here about using defensive spells?
Using spells? Well, I can't imagine why you would need to use spells in my classroom.
We're not going to use magic.
You will be learning about defensive spells in a secure, risk-free way.
Well, what use is that? If we're going to be attacked, it won't be risk-free.
Students will raise their hands when they speak in my class.
I'm going to go ahead and skip on to the next little clip from these Harry Potter videos. This one is going to show two different teachers at the school conversing about what to do in terms of disciplining the students, and what happens when somebody disagrees with you.
I am merely requesting that when it comes to my students, you conform to the prescribed disciplinary practices.
So silly of me, but it sounds as if you're questioning my authority in my own classroom. Minerva.
Not at all, Dolores. Merely your medieval methods.
I am sorry, dear. But to question my practices is to question the ministry, and by extension, the minister himself. I am a tolerant woman, but the one thing I will not stand for is disloyalty.
Disloyalty.
Things at Hogwarts are far worse than I feared. Cornelius will want to take immediate action.
All right. And then we're going to flip over to the contrast side. Let's looking at what are examples of successful, positive leadership. This is Brene Brown. There's no need for me to kind of share a lot of her work, but her main idea, or one of her main ideas, is about vulnerability. And it's not about winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. And one of the themes that's going to come out of all of this work from today's workshop is really what it means to be a courageous leader. And I'm going to show this clip from Jacinda Ardern. Again, she's the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and the way that she shows vulnerability is pretty striking.
Evening, everyone. That I would jump online quickly and just check in with everyone, really, as we all prepare to hunker down for a few weeks. Excuse the casual attire. Can be a messy business putting toddlers to bed, so I'm not in my work clothes, so forgive me for that. I do just want to prepare everyone that because of the lag with COVID-19, the time from someone having contact with someone who has it, catching it themselves, them being symptomatic and being tested and positive, there's a number of days before all of that happens. So we won't see the positive benefits of all of the effort you're about to put in for self-isolation for a few days yet, quite a number of days. I'd say at least 10 days. So don't be disheartened. Our numbers are going to go up. And the modelling I've seen suggests that they will go up quite considerably. We'll see quite a steep rise. In fact, I'm expecting we may see several thousand cases over a period of time until we then will start to, we hope, see the effects of what we're doing with self-isolation having a positive impact. So don't be disheartened when you see that. Don't be disheartened when you see that ongoing increase because of that lag. All of the efforts that we're putting in should eventually show if we all follow the rules. Till then, do check in on your neighbours. Do especially check on those who may be elderly. Give them a call, see what their needs are. And if you can help them, go out and grab their essentials and pop them on the front door for them. Just remembering the way we can keep them safe is by keeping our distance. Remember, stay at home, break the chain, and you'll save lives. And it's as simple as that. That's everyone's job for the next 4 months.
All right. So again, this is looking at what is the role of power versus vulnerability and empathy. How does that impact leadership? So if you had any insights during seeing any of those clips, I'd love to hear in the chat what you drew from that. I loved how Prime Minister Ardern turned up in her sweatshirt and sweatpants after tucking her toddler into bed. It's really a kind of contrast to how professional we all try to be as educators around our families and the parents that are in our community. Another way to think of it is how do you empower your teams and empower your families to participate in some of these decisions? I am at Chrysalis Charter School. We are a teacher-powered school, meaning that the teachers really do take a very key role in deciding all of the policy. And when we made the decision to whether to reopen or not, we had several choices back in August about what we could do. So we could open in person full days. We could reopen in a hybrid format so that we had our classrooms broken up into 2 smaller groups, and each group would come for a half day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, with disinfecting time in the middle. And we were also thinking, should we just keep everybody at home? Is that the safest course of action? And there were so many unknowns back in August here in California that we didn't quite know what to do. So this idea of empowering teams, we actually put the question both to our families and to our staff. In fact, we went to the staff and said, staff, what do you want to do? And we had this very long, intense discussion. And the staff said, we're not ready to make a decision yet until we hear from the families. So then, of course, we released a survey to get the input of all of our families. What would work for you? What are the hardships? How can we help support that? We took that together a week later with the staff, and we decided, okay, we're going to open in hybrid. So we're going to open, AM, PM cohorts, and we're going to have that disinfecting time in the middle. We're going to have an option for those morning students to be able to stay all day so that families at work would continue to be able to do so. And in doing that, we were able to meet many, many more needs than we could have if we had first made a decision right away, or if we had just followed the lead of all of the other districts in our area. Because in our area, a lot of districts just chose, you know what, it's too uncertain, we're just going to close, and we're not going to open on August 12th like we had planned. Taking a look at some of the chat now. Jose, you're saying, I think this goes back to your example from the previous panel, where what we should see is more student-led leadership, or in a general sense, leadership from all voices. And that was exactly what I had just talked about. I agree that it is pretty heartbreaking to, kind of silence the students and not prepare them for the real world. And that vulnerability means that you might not have the answers and you too are scared. Yeah, absolutely. And Shannon, showing vulnerability does not mean not providing direction. So that prime minister knew exactly what she was asking the country to do and why, and she was honest about what she didn't know for sure. And I think that when you can be honest about this is the facts that I know, these are the facts that I don't, and being able to say, based on what we know, here's where we are going to proceed. And this is also based on all of your input, then suddenly it feels like we're all going into this as a team. We're all kind of proceeding as a unit. And when there are shifts, that we change. And that is another thing. You may be aware of the research of Carol Dweck and growth mindset and grit. All of those kinds of things, those kind of principles apply so much to a strong leader in being able to shift and pivot as new information comes in, to admit your mistakes. And that, again, is part of that vulnerability piece, to say, oh, you know what, that decision that we made, now that we have more information, let's go ahead and shift it a little bit and go this way instead. So let me summarize a couple of the key takeaways, and then I'd love to just kind of open it up to conversation. So key takeaway number one, courageous leaders are brutally honest about the challenge ahead and people's fears, but temper their message with a plan and credible hope that together we can meet the challenge. Another one, courageous leaders listen to experts and reflect before taking action. They act decisively, but adopt a growth mindset that is willing to listen, learn, and pivot as the situation changes. Number three, that courageous leaders empower others with a role and purpose within the larger mission. I just did another panel discussion a little bit ago, and one of the key takeaways from that was really how when you can empower the people that are closest to the problem, that are closest to the challenge, to be able to take the initiative and solve the problem and figure it out, or work together as a team to solve that makes a far more effective organization. There's a gentleman named Charles Duhigg, and he wrote a book about productivity. And in that, he really dissects out how when you can disseminate and distribute that decision-making capability and allow many people to participate in that conversation and to use their ideas, like he actually tells the example of a factory worker from a factory worker in a Toyota plant, and how the way that it is disseminated and distributed is that they are there with the line workers, and the line workers are empowered to say, you know what, if I see a problem, I'm going to stop this entire line and make sure that things are safe, or make sure that this is done right. And by doing so, that really changes the dynamic, and it gives people so much more buy-in to what they're doing and into their work. And suddenly, instead of you having, worker bees coming in just to get their paycheck, you have people who are passionate about making this organization better, because they each know that they have a role within that group that is unique and special, and that they make a contribution. And if you feel like you're making a contribution, even if you're the custodian, even if you're the person just answering phones, if you feel like that is a contribution, then suddenly your buy-in and your productivity skyrockets. The last little takeaway is that courageous leaders lead from humanity with great stores of emotional awareness and discipline. They care, feed, love, and mentor their people, starting with themselves. And we have been at Chrysalis doing a whole lot of self-care. I created an entire wall of like little just slips of paper. I mean, it cost nothing, but it was little kind of self-care things. So there was one envelope that was all about grace. It's okay to take your lesson planning period and go for a walk. Sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes you need to not make dinner and just order out. Sometimes, connection is a really important one. So I had another little envelope with all these little slips of paper about connection, that just petting your dog in the evenings is a huge restorative effect. And so giving people a lot of tips for how to take care of themselves and giving them permission to do that. Right before Thanksgiving, we delivered this to each of the teachers, and it's just full of like little lotions and self-care things. Like I think we had a bath bomb and a manicure set and other things, just little things, as well as a little candle. And I even put a lottery ticket in there. All sorts of things just to kind of boost people's spirits right before the Thanksgiving holidays. Because I acknowledge and I know that the traditions that we normally have are going to be different, and we can't do all of the normal things. And so can I help boost the spirit of my community so that the teachers and staff know, hey, they're treasured, they're seen, the efforts that they put in are okay. In fact, on the bag, I wrote, every day you're giving your best. And yes, some days that best is simply the best I can do right now. And that is more than enough. And so when teachers hear that, when staff hear that, they suddenly recognize, oh, okay, I can take a breath. But the amazing thing is, by just saying that you give them that permission to like take a breath, when they're on, they give far more than they would have otherwise. So anyway, those are some ideas. One other thing I just wanted to mention is I also designed a workshop for my staff, all about how do you restore joy and balance? How do you manage your energy instead of your time? Because time is a fixed entity, right? You only have 24 hours a day. You can't get more. You can't stretch it. You can't change the amount of time you have, but you can change the amount of energy. And so I did a workshop for my staff, and I'll share with a link to that on my website so that you can kind of take a look at it yourselves in case that is supportive for you. But the idea behind it is that energy, like the amount of energy you feel and the energy you have at the start of the day, when you wake up in the morning, your energy tank should be full. But you can deplete that through the day. And there's a lot of research on kind of decision fatigue and other things showing that as you go through the day, your ability to make decisions declines because you can't, the amount of energy you started with goes down. And when they do these research projects, they look at, say, judges, right? And the decisions that judges make towards the end of the day are not as good as the ones they make at the beginning. And the interesting part is that when a judge takes a lunch break or when they go and do a coffee break, that the decisions they make immediately afterwards are better. And so what this shows is that you actually can have control over how much energy you have. You can't control your time, but you can control your energy. And so I was doing this workshop for the staff to help them figure out, how do you manage that energy? How can you increase your gas tank for the day? How can you refuel and visit the gas station to kind of give yourself that little refueling boost throughout the day so that by the end of the day, you're not wiped out? So by the end of the day, you don't have to go home and just collapse on your couch because you're done. Instead, you have enough time and energy to spend some time with your kids and make dinner and, enjoy the things that matter so that the next day when you wake up, you're refueled. So that workshop, it's like a little 50-minute thing that I created for the staff. I also am going to do a paid 4-week class, but that workshop was really designed so that I could help support the staff because that's what I was feeling in them. This feeling of like running around frazzled and multitasking all the time. I wanted to help support them with that. And so giving them tools to be able to manage that, I thought was really important. At this time, we have about 8 minutes left. Does anyone have other questions? That kind of wraps up the things that I was going to share. And I would love to know if there's any other questions. Are there other things that I can give you, other resources, anything at all? In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop my email in here as well as the link to that workshop, which is also on my website. So if you have any further interest in, oops, I should stop talking and typing at the same time. If you have any further interest in exploring any of those ideas, you can reach out to me. That's my email. go. So are there questions out there? What do you want to hear more about? I can tell you about time confetti. I can tell you more about some of the leadership work and what Nancy Cohen was studying. Think of this as your self-care time. What can I do to help support you? More insight about my teacher-led school. Oh yeah. Let me grab some of the slides that I did for the teacher-powered panel. So Chrysalis is what I call a teacher-led school. And by that, what I mean is the teachers, they are the ones that are in control. They are the ones that really make all of the decisions. They create the policies, all of like the discipline policies down to health and safety policies. They are the core piece of that. They set the budget. They set the bell schedule. They set the school calendar. They hire me and fire me and evaluate me every year. In terms of teacher evaluations, they evaluate one another. So we have a whole system of peer evaluations. And the dynamic between principals and teachers, I was sharing this at the other session, that we have what we call a decision tree. And that some decisions are what I call leaf decisions. Those are the ones the teachers are like, you know what? I don't care about that. You just take care of it. Things like what insurance the school's going to go with, or what does the bus run look like, or who do we contract for tech services. They don't care who it is. They just want someone to arrive and show up when their printer breaks. So those are leaf decisions. I just take care of that for them. And every year we kind of decide, okay, what things are going to be leaf decisions versus what are going to be root decisions that year. Root decisions are ones where everybody has to be there. So when we do charter renewal, everybody's in the room. We don't want to try to tackle charter renewal without everybody there because it's so important. Same thing with like mission, vision, hiring a new admin. All of that is everybody in the room. Branch decisions are committees, so they assign the task to a committee. For instance, interventions and enhancements are done that way because there's a certain group of teachers who are really passionate about that, and other ones don't care so much. We also have committees for, personnel, for budget, and so forth. Trunk decisions are ones where either the admin or the committee are asked to bring their decisions back to the group before they move forward. So for instance, the budget committee redesigned our salary schedules at one point, and they were asked to bring that back to the whole group so that the group could say yes or no, but it was the committee who did all the groundwork and the research and looking at the differences between what our district was paying versus what other districts in the area were. So those are the kinds of ways that we do that decision making. And I see myself as that facilitator. I'm not as much, well, I am a leader, but I'm also that facilitator of the group to make sure that the group is moving forward on their common goals. Meg, you asked about time confetti. So time confetti is this idea that your day gets broken up into all these teeny tiny little pieces. And if your day and your time gets broken up in such, teeny tiny pieces, suddenly you're not as effective. There's a lot of research showing that multitasking and not staying focused on a single task at one time is a lot less productive. So, about 3 years ago, I was totally in time confetti mode. So it's like, oh, I have 5 minutes before that, meeting starts. I'm going to check my email and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to use the restroom as well. And when I come back, then suddenly I'll have my meeting. And then in the meeting, if I wasn't leading it, I'd be having my email on the side. And so what happens is that you're never focused entirely on what's in front of you. Instead, you're bouncing from task to task to task to task. And that switching cost is really detrimental to actually being able to get anything done and also keep your energy reserves up. So time confetti is one of those things where if your day gets broken up in that way, you get a lot less done and you're more wiped out by the end.